It's real. Look up what it's worth." He said it without looking up. The metal made a small sound against the laminate. Not dramatic, just metal on a hard surface. The way a coin sounds when you set it down, tired of carrying it. The waitress stopped moving. Ken kept his eyes on his eggs. Half a plate left, gone cold while he'd been deciding. She was young, 20s, maybe. She looked at the thing the way you look at something you don't have a name for yet. He picked up his cup with his left hand and drank what was left in it. Then his eyes moved. Just once, slow and automatic, to the door, to the parking lot beyond it, to the patrol unit sitting dark under the lot light. Back to his plate. The jackknife lay beside his fork. He hadn't used it. He wouldn't need to. "Hey, Darlene." The waitress held the metal up toward the pass-through light, turning it between her fingers. "You know what this is?" The cook looked up from his mop, glanced at it, shrugged, and went back to the floor. She set it on the shelf beneath the register, next to a roll of quarters and a pen that had no cap. She'd figure it out later, or she wouldn't. Ken watched none of this, or he watched all of it, without appearing to. He cut the toast. The jackknife came out of his left jacket pocket in one motion. Not a production, not a pause before it, just a hand going to a pocket and a blade appearing. The way a man reaches for a salt shaker. The wood handle caught the fluorescent light for a moment. It was pale, close-grained, a different color than the metal bolster on each end. Not factory wood, something else. The grain ran at a slight angle, like it had been cut from something that was never meant to be a handle. The edges were worn smooth in the specific places where a thumb rests and a palm closes, which takes years. He quartered the toast, folded the blade back, returned it to his pocket. Ate. He ate the way he did everything, without waste. The fork moved from plate to mouth at a pace that suggested a man who had eaten standing up, in the dark, in worse places than this, and had learned to be grateful for a chair. He finished the eggs before the toast, drank the last of the orange juice in 2 swallows, set the glass down without any sound. The diner had 4 other seats occupied. A trucker at the far booth, head down over his phone. A couple near the window who were not speaking to each other, but not unhappy. Just tired. A man in a gray pullover at the middle of the counter, 2 stools down, who had introduced himself to nobody, and was writing in a small notebook, occasionally clicking a recorder on, then off, then on again. Ken had clocked him in the first 90 seconds. Not a threat, but not invisible either. The recorder and the notebook, and the way the man looked at the room, not at people, at the room, at things, at data, that was its own kind of tell. Ken looked at his toast. Somewhere inside the rhythm of chewing and the low hum of the overhead speaker and the wet slap of the cook's mop, something else moved. Not a thought exactly, more like weather. A smell that wasn't here. Concrete dust and disinfectant and the specific warmth of an animal in a confined space. The sound of chain link under a paw. That particular metallic scratch. A dog's breathing. Not the in and out of a resting dog, but the measured, purposeful breath of one that is working, that knows it is about to work, that has learned to run its engine at a controlled rate before the door opens. He put the toast down. His thumb found the jacket pocket without him deciding to move it. He didn't take the knife out, just rested his thumb against the shape of it through the fabric, the wood warm from being carried. There had been a wall, a kennel wall, painted cinder block, gray-green, scuffed at the height a dog's shoulder reaches when it turns in a run. He had taken a section of it the day they put the dog down. Not the whole wall, a piece. Enough. He hadn't known then what he would do with it. He'd found out later, with a pocket knife and time, and no particular plan beyond keeping his hands occupied. He picked up the toast, finished it, scanned the door, the parking lot, the patrol unit sitting dark under the lot light. Back to his plate. The door opened at 11:43. Ken didn't look up right away. He heard the change in the room first. The waitress pulling herself upright behind the counter, the cook's mop going quiet, and then the low, deliberate sound of nails on linoleum. Working dog. Heavy, unhurried. He looked up then. The officer who came through was young, maybe late 20s, broad across the shoulders, the kind of build that still carried some high school sports in it. His uniform was end-of-shift wrinkled. He moved through the door with the relaxed authority of someone who owned the night shift, said something easy to the waitress about water for the dog, and settled onto a stool 2 seats down from Ken, without really registering him. The dog was a Belgian Malinois, black saddle, fawn body, ears up and working. It wore a canine vest and held a perfect heel at the officer's left side. But its nose was moving constantly, cataloging the room in that systematic way they had. Left to right, low to high, the way a good dog never really came off duty. The officer's name tag read Miller. Ken watched the dog. Not the way the diner watched the dog. The waitress was smiling at it, soft-eyed, the way people went soft around any animal they considered handsome. The cook had leaned out from the kitchen door to look. What they were doing was admiring. What Ken was doing was different. He watched the dog's ears, the cant of the head, the way it had cataloged the room and was now sitting clean at Miller's knee, but kept returning its attention, just a degree or two, almost nothing, to the far booth in the corner, where an older man in a gray cardigan had been nursing the same cup of black tea for 40 minutes. Ken had noticed the man when he sat down. He had noticed the way the man's breathing had changed in the last 10 minutes, gotten a little ragged, a little shallow. He had noticed the man's hand lying open on the table, the fingers not quite relaxed. He noticed all of it the way you notice weather coming, automatic. Ken shifted his weight on the stool. Not much. He moved maybe 2 inches to his left and let his posture open slightly, shoulders down, the small adjustment a handler makes when he wants a working dog to know there is no threat present at this position. Nothing performed about it. Muscle memory from a long time ago, in places nothing like this diner. Rook's ears came around. The dog didn't move its head, didn't break heel position, but those ears swiveled toward Ken with the precision of a dish antenna, held for 2 seconds, and then the dog's posture dropped a fraction. Not relaxed exactly, but recalibrated, like it had filed Ken somewhere different than it had filed everyone else in the room. Miller almost caught it. He glanced down at the dog, then sideways at Ken, the way you check a thing you think you just imagined. Ken was already looking at his plate, forking the last of his eggs, the jackknife closed beside his water glass. Miller's water came. He set it down for Rook, who drank with the focused efficiency of an animal that didn't waste anything either. Ken turned his mug in his hands, unhurried. His eyes moved once more to the man in the gray cardigan, who shifted in his seat and pressed his free hand briefly to his sternum, the motion small enough that no one else in the room had seen it. Ken set the mug down, watched the man breathe. The counter speaker murmured on, some Veteran Affairs podcast, the host mid-sentence about archival training recordings, and Ken did not listen to it, because his attention had already left the room and gone somewhere quieter and more immediate. "You mind if I sit?" The man didn't wait for an answer. He was mid-30s, corduroy jacket, a little underdressed for the cold that came in with him when he pushed through the door. He set a small digital recorder on the laminate and pulled out the stool 2 down from Ken's, with the easy assurance of a man who had never been told no by a stranger. Tobias Mazur. He said it like an introduction to a lecture. "I'm with the university. Criminology. I'm doing field work on veteran economic displacement." He smiled. It was a professional smile, the kind that meant he had smiled it many times before, without it meaning anything particular. "You don't mind if I ask a few questions?" Ken looked at him. "Not long, just enough to take a reading." "Go ahead." Mazur clicked the recorder on. The small red light came alive. "So the data on this is actually pretty consistent," he said, pulling a folded printout from his jacket pocket and smoothing it flat on the counter. He did not look at Ken when he spoke, the way a man might not look at a specimen he is already confident he has correctly identified. Veterans between 55 and 65 represent something like 31% of the chronically unsheltered population in rural transit corridors. Which is, it's a staggering figure. He looked up. "Are you currently housed?" Ken had the jackknife in his fingers. He turned it once, slowly, the replaced wood catching the fluorescent light. Some nights. Right. Mazur typed something into his phone with one thumb. And prior service? Yes. Branch? Ken ate a forkful of eggs. Chewed. Army. Combat deployments? 3. Mazur nodded, the way a doctor nods when a symptom confirms a diagnosis he expected. So there's a significant body of research, Hartman and Keeley, the 2019 cohort study, that links repeated combat exposure to what they call economic anchor failure, which essentially means the mechanisms veterans use to stay economically viable in civilian life erode faster than the general population. He paused, waiting for something. Agreement, maybe. Or recognition of the terminology. Does any of that resonate with your experience? Ken set his fork down. He picked up the cup, drank, set it back without any wasted motion, and looked at Mazur the way he had looked at the door every time it opened. Not hostile, just reading. You're recording this. Mazur glanced at the device. With your consent, yes. It's just for my notes. Nothing. I know what it's for. A beat of quiet. The cook's mop made a wet drag across the tile somewhere behind the pass-through. The scanner murmured on low in the back. Hartman and Keeley, Ken said. Not a question. Not mockery either. He said it the way you read back a number that doesn't add up. Flat, waiting to be corrected. They're considered fairly authoritative in the field. Ken turned the jackknife again. The wood was dark from years of handling, the grain almost invisible now, worn smooth in the places his thumb rested. How many veterans did they talk to? Mazur blinked. It was a longitudinal survey. Questionnaires, primarily. Several hundred respondents. Questionnaires. Yes. Ken did not say anything else. He put the jackknife flat on the counter, picked up his fork, and went back to eating. Mazur clicked the recorder off, then on again. He was looking at Ken the way a man looks when the data is not behaving the way the study said it would. His mouth came open, then shut, and he reached back through his notes for a different question. Before he could find one, Rook moved. Not aggressively, not toward the door. The dog turned toward the far booth and dropped his nose, and something in the way he moved made the hair on the back of Ken's neck go up before his brain had finished explaining why. And the data on reintegration failure within the first 18 months is really quite consistent across multiple peer-reviewed. Ken was already off his stool. He didn't push Tobias aside, didn't announce anything. He just moved, and the movement had a direction and a weight that made Tobias stop mid-syllable, the way you stop when a door opens into your sentence. The old man in the back booth had gone sideways, slowly, the way a heavy thing goes when the thing holding it up gives out quietly rather than all at once. His coffee mug was still on the table, still upright. His chin had dropped to his chest. One hand had slid off the laminate edge and was hanging loose toward the floor. Rook was at the far end of the counter now, and he was doing something Brian couldn't name. Not barking, not lunging. He was planted between the door and the booth, nose working in fast, precise pulls, and he kept cutting his eyes back to Brian in a pattern that wasn't random. Short look, long look, short look, and his body was drawn up tight, weight forward, every line of him pointing at the slumped man while simultaneously blocking anyone from getting close. Brian had his hand on the leash, but he wasn't moving. He didn't know what Rook was telling him. You could see it on his face, the honest uncertainty of a handler who trusts his dog completely and cannot read the word his dog is spelling. The waitress had her hand over her mouth. The cook had stopped mopping. Tobias Mazur was standing with his recorder half raised, the red light blinking, watching. Ken crossed the diner in 8 steps. He didn't go to the old man first, he went to Rook. He came in from the side, not behind, not head-on, and he let Rook smell his hand without offering it, just lowering it open at the dog's shoulder height, moving slowly with his elbow tucked, the way you move near a working dog that hasn't met you. A gesture with no threat in it, just information. He said one word. Low, in the back of the throat. A specific phonetic shape that wasn't English and wasn't a sound Brian had ever heard him use. Not a command to sit or stay. Something older. Something from a register the dog recognized at a level below conscious obedience. Rook's body changed. Not completely, but enough. The tight line of his spine softened half an inch. His weight shifted back off his front feet. He kept his nose pointed at the booth, but he stopped blocking and took one step to the side. Ken looked at Brian then. He's not alerting a threat, he said. Flat, certain, no qualifier. Your dog is signaling a medical emergency. The pattern he's running is low-level scent acquisition on a downed person. He's been trained for it. He doesn't know you're not reading him. Brian's mouth opened. Call it in, Ken said. Right now. And keep him at your left side, not your right, or he's going to try to block the paramedics at the door, because that's what he'll see. More people coming toward the target. Left side. He'll feel your heartbeat through your leg. It'll keep him regulated. Brian already had the radio off his belt. Ken moved to the booth. The old man was breathing. Shallow. Slow. The kind of slow that isn't sleep. His color was wrong. And his pulse, when Ken pressed 2 fingers to the side of his neck without ceremony or hesitation, was there, but not where it should be. Ken looked up at the waitress. Tell them conscious but unresponsive. Tell them he's been this way under a minute. Tell them his left arm is slack. She nodded and went for the phone. Tobias Mazur had not moved. The recorder was still in his hand. The red light was still on. Rook was still in the doorway. 4-point block. Chest forward. Body angled. Not aggression. Not fear. The dog was doing exactly what it was trained to do. Which was the problem. Brian had one hand on the lead and was trying to read it and couldn't. And every second he couldn't was a second the paramedics couldn't get through. Ken came off the stool without hurry. His voice dropped to a register that was almost below conversation. Not a command yet. Something quieter. A frequency. Easy, easy, Rook. The dog's ears moved. Not a lot. Enough. Brian started to say something, and Ken raised 2 fingers, just slightly, without looking at him. Not rude. Final. He took 3 steps toward the door, stopped 4 feet from the animal and crouched. Not fast. The way you lower yourself when you are trying not to be a threat, when you need the dog to do the recalculating, not you. His left hand was loose at his side. The jackknife was in his jacket pocket, and his hand was nowhere near it. He said 2 words in a clipped phonetic cadence that Brian had never heard before. Tight vowels, hard stop at the end, and Rook broke the block. Not all the way. Enough. Enough to open the door. The cook waved the paramedics through and they went, moving fast, and Ken stayed where he was, crouched, letting Rook work through it, one hand finally lifting and turning palm up, offering nothing, just space, and the dog put its nose down once and exhaled. Brian said quietly, "How did you?" And that was the moment. Because the counter radio was still going. Low, under everything. It had been running all evening beneath the clatter and the conversation and Tobias Mazur's citations, one of those late-night veteran affairs programs that nobody changes because nobody remembers it's on. And what was playing, in that particular stretch of silence after the paramedics moved through and the diner held its breath, was a recording, an old one, a training session. You could hear the ambient echo of a concrete facility, the soft movement of a working dog, and then a voice giving a command. The same clipped phonetic cadence, the same tight vowels, the same hard stop. Brian Miller's head turned toward the radio, the way a compass needle finds north. Slow, involuntary. He looked at the radio. He looked at Ken, still crouched near the door. He looked at the radio again. The color left his face in stages. He had listened to that recording, not once, not 10 times. Brian had listened to it the way young handlers listen to something that changed what they thought was possible. In the truck, in the kennel, late at night before a deployment he wasn't sure he was ready for. He knew every pause in it. He knew the ambient echo of that facility. He knew the cadence of every command on it. He took one step forward, then another. "That's—" His voice broke and came back. "That's the Mercer recording." Ken didn't move. The K9 operations training session. Brian was speaking to the room now, not to Ken. The way you speak when you need witnesses to confirm that what you are seeing is real. There was a handler. He was never officially. His methods are still in the curriculum. Every working dog program in the service uses his framework. He stopped, swallowed. Ken Mercer, that's what they called it. The Mercer recording. He turned and looked at the man in the wheat-colored jacket, still crouched 4 feet from a working dog that had just done what it was told. "That's your voice," Brian said. "On the radio right now. That is your voice." Ken straightened slowly. He looked at Brian without expression, the way a man looks when he has been found somewhere he thought he was invisible. Then he looked at Rook. The radio played on. "Cardiac," Ken said. Not to Brian, to the room. Flat, like a coordinate. Brian looked at him. "What? Your dog isn't blocking the door because of a threat." Ken was already moving, unhurried, weight forward from the counter stool. "He's alerting on the man in the back booth. The behavior pattern, the low body, the door block, the redirect arc. He's been trained to signal medical emergency, and he found one." He glanced at Brian once. "Call it in if you haven't already. Tell them cardiac. Don't say possible." Brian's hand went to his radio without question, the way a man responds to a voice that knows. The waitress was already at the back booth, one hand on the old man's shoulder, saying his name. He wasn't answering. His head had gone sideways against the window, one hand flat on the table edge like he was trying to hold the diner still. Ken crossed the floor in 8 steps, and Rook tracked every one of them. That was the problem. Rook was still in the alert posture, body low and angled across the threshold, and paramedics weren't going to push past a 90-pound working dog without losing 30 seconds they did not have. Brian was giving the call. The cook had stopped mopping. Tobias Mazur had pressed himself against the counter, with his recorder held against his chest like a hymnal. Ken stopped 3 feet from Rook and did not reach for the dog. He crouched, slowly, coming level with the animal's eye line. Rook's ears came up, not threat response, something closer to recognition, the way a dog responds to a register it was trained to. Ken drew one measured breath, and then he spoke. The command was 2 syllables in a precise falling pitch, not loud, not sharp, the specific phonetic drop that a dog at that training level associates with release from active alert and reorientation to handler. It wasn't the word that mattered. It was the cadence, the weight behind it, the certainty in it. Rook's whole body shifted. The blocking stance broke. The dog turned, stepped aside, sat, and looked at Ken with ears fully forward. The door was clear. The paramedics came through 40 seconds later. Ken stayed low beside Rook while they worked, one hand eventually coming to rest along the dog's flank. Not gripping, just contact. The way you steady a partner after they have done what they were built to do. Rook's breathing slowed under it. Brian watched from the far side of the booth, radio back on his shoulder, saying nothing. The old man was breathing, shallow and wrong, but breathing. When the stretcher came through, Ken stood, moved without ceremony to give them room, and ended up back near the counter, almost without choosing it. The instinct of a man who finishes a task and returns to the perimeter. He picked up his coffee cup. It was cold. He drank it anyway. Brian crossed the diner and stopped beside him. The radio was still going behind the counter, low and steady. The podcast hadn't stopped. "That command register," Brian said. His voice was careful, like he was handling something fragile. "Rook doesn't respond to civilians. I've never seen him break alert for anyone but me." Ken set the cup down. "He responded to the training," Ken said. "Not to me." Brian looked at the dog, then back at him. "Those are the same thing. In this case," he paused. "You know they are." Ken didn't answer that. He watched the paramedics work on the old man through the booth window, his hands loose at his sides, unhurried. The jackknife was in his jacket pocket. He hadn't touched it once in the last 4 minutes. That was the only answer he gave. The paramedics had the old man on the gurney before the cook stopped mopping. Just stopped mid-stroke, leaned the mop against the counter, and watched them wheel him toward the door. Rook moved aside without being told. Brian had his hand on the dog's collar anyway, but it wasn't necessary anymore. The diner went quiet, in the way a room goes quiet after a loud noise. Not peaceful, just emptied out. Tobias hadn't moved from his stool. His recorder was in his hand, thumb resting on the button, but the button was up. Had been up for 10 minutes. He was watching Ken the way he had not watched him once all evening. Not cataloging, not framing, just watching. Ken came back to the counter, sat down. His coffee was cold and he drank it anyway. Tobias set the recorder on the laminate. Didn't put it in his pocket. Didn't click it back on. Just set it down like a thing he was done carrying. Why didn't you ever? He stopped. Started over. Why didn't you build something from it? A school. A program. You could have. Not a statistic. Not a framework. Just a question. Ken was quiet for a moment. Then he leaned over the counter and said, "Lo," to the waitress. The one who had taken his medal 3 hours ago and slid it in her apron pocket without knowing what it was. "Can I get that back?" She looked at him, uncertain. Then she reached in and placed it on the laminate. The purple heart, worn smooth on the edges, the ribbon faded from whatever its original red had been. He picked it up, turned it once in his fingers, not like the jackknife, differently, slower. Then he set it down on the table in front of Tobias. Tobias looked at it, looked up. "I used that tonight to pay for eggs," Ken said. "Not the first time. I do it to see." "See what?" Ken looked across the diner. Brian was at the far end of the counter, pretending to check Rook's harness, pretending not to listen. The cook had started mopping again, slowly. The fluorescent light above the back booth was still flickering, had been all night. Whether it still has any weight, he looked back at the metal. A piece of metal. You'd think it wouldn't. You'd think I'd know by now. He paused. But I needed to know if someone would notice. If a room would know what it was, without me telling them. Tobias didn't say anything. "It's not about the metal," Ken said. "It never was. The weight is in the room knowing, whether the room holds it or doesn't." He looked at the metal on the table between them. Tonight the room held it. He looked over at Rook, who was lying down now, chin on his paws, breathing easy. The dog who had known something was wrong before any human in the building had thought to look. Ken watched him for a few seconds. "Brian asked me the same thing, about the school, the program." He almost smiled. "Didn't quite. I had a dog who didn't know what a medal was, didn't know what a commendation was, didn't know his own history. He just knew the work. A breath. I'm trying to get back to that." Tobias looked at the recorder on the table. He didn't reach for it. After a while he said, "I've been researching veterans for 3 years. I don't think I've ever actually talked to one." Ken picked up the purple heart. He held it for one more moment, unhurried, the way he held everything, then slid it into his jacket pocket, alongside the jackknife, the carved wood, the day the kennel wall came down. He pulled a few dollars from his pocket, left them under the coffee cup, and stood up. Brian slid the napkin across the counter without ceremony. Just a number, written in the blocky print of a man used to filling out forms in the dark. Ken looked at it, didn't pick it up, set his coffee cup beside it instead, the ceramic base holding one corner flat. Neither of them said anything about what it meant. Rook moved then. Not urgently. The dog was past urgency for the night. He stepped sideways under the counter stool, turned once, and lowered himself to the floor. His broad head came down across Ken's left boot with the full, deliberate weight of an animal that had made a judgment and acted on it. The napkin caught under the outer edge of one paw. Ken looked down at him. The dog's eyes were already half closed, chest rising and falling in the slow rhythm of something that had done its work, and knew it. Ken didn't pull his boot away. He reached into his jacket pocket, Not for the jackknife, not for the metal, and just rested his hand there, over the carved wood, the way you rest a hand on something you're not ready to put down. The fluorescent light above the counter ticked once. The radio played low. Nobody moved toward the door.